Hello, this is Mark Grier. And for the next hour, I'll be reading from the January 29th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, let's get going with the first article. Trump and Schumer move toward possible deal to avert a shutdown. The president and the top Senate Democrat were discussing an agreement to split off Homeland Security funding from a border spending package and negotiate new limits on immigration agents. President Trump and Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, and the minority leader moved on Wednesday night toward a possible agreement to negotiate new restrictions on federal immigration agents, potentially averting a government shutdown early Saturday when funding for multiple federal agencies is slated to lapse. Under the emerging plan, according to two officials knowledgeable about it, the Senate would split off legislation funding the Department of Homeland Security from a six-bill package of spending measures needed to keep the military, health programs, and other federal agencies funded for the remainder of the fiscal year. The Senate would pass those bills before a Friday midnight deadline. The Congress also would consider a short-term extension for Homeland Security operations, which would prevent interruption of services by the Transportation Security Agencies, Coast Guard, and Federal Emergency Management Agency. That stopgap bill would provide time for talks between lawmakers and the White House to draft a new Homeland Security spending bill that would include new restrictions that Democrats have demanded on the tactics of immigration enforcement officers and more accountability for those accused of using excessive force. The White House had no immediate comment on the possible deal. Officials emphasized that the agreement was not sealed and multiple hurdles remained. But the progress toward a potential off ramp from the shutdown came, according to the officials, after Senate Democrats earlier on Wednesday had laid out the changes that they insisted must be made in the Trump administration's conduct of its immigration crackdown before they would support continued funding for the Department of Homeland Security. Among the demands from Democrats was the federal agents carrying out Mr. Trump's deportation campaign take off their masks, wear body cameras, and halt random sweeps and warrantless searches and arrests. Mr. Schumer had pushed Senator John Thune of South Dakota, Republican and Majority Leader, to break up the six-bill package and allow a rewriting of the Homeland Security legislation after Saturday's fatal shooting in Minneapolis of Alex Preddy. Mr. Thune had resisted, but also encouraged Mr. Schumer to seek a deal with the administration. It was unclear how the potential agreement would impact a test vote on the spending package set for Thursday morning. It also came as Tom Homan, the border czar, dispatched by Mr. Trump to try to quiet the tumult in Minneapolis, was to hold a news conference Thursday morning. Senator Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, and the chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, said the two sides were moving toward a resolution of the crisis. It appears that the White House and the Senate are making good progress to avoid a shutdown, she said. All right, next article. The man agents were seeking when they killed Preddy remains at large. Federal officials said agents were looking for an Ecuadorian named Jose Huerto Chuma. Records show he faced allegations of domestic assault and had several traffic infractions. Federal officials said Border Patrol agents had been searching for a dangerous criminal when they fatally shot Alex Preddy on a Minneapolis sidewalk. 4 days later, that man still has not been arrested, said Tricia McLaughlin, a spokeswoman for the Department of Homeland Security. Gregory Bovino, who headed Border Patrol operations in the city until he was reassigned this week, said Sunday that the target was an Ecuadorian named Jose Huerta Chuma. Mr. Bovino said that he had a significant criminal history. Court records indicate that Mr. Huerta Chuma has had traffic violations and one misdemeanor related to domestic abuse, but has never been convicted of a felony. At least 8 federal agents in tactical gear were involved in the Saturday operation to apprehend him that ended in the killing of Mr. Preddy, a U.S. citizen and nurse. According to the Times video analysis, federal officials have said their operation in Minnesota is meant to deport the worst of the worst. But the display of force to target a man with a relatively low-level criminal record has alarmed observers who say their tactics are disproportionate. They are literally murdering our neighbors to catch people with misdemeanors, said Mike Berger, Hennepin County Chief Public Defender, whose office represented Mr. Huerta Chuma in several cases. Mr. Bovino said that the man was not captured because agitators had harassed and disrupted federal agents. Rodney Scott, the Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, said such heated confrontations require more agents for single arrests. We are basically putting up 2 teams, one team to make the original arrest and the other team to protect those agents and officers, he told Fox News on Sunday. Federal officials' description of Mr. Huerta Chuma criminal record has also been disputed. Mr. Bovino said on Sunday it included domestic assault to intentionally inflict bodily harm, disorderly conduct, and driving without a valid license. But Mr. Huerta Chuma was not convicted of domestic assault, according to Minnesota court records. In 2018, he was charged with a misdemeanor domestic assault, but pled guilty to a lesser offense of disorderly conduct, according to records and Mr. Berger. The disorderly conduct conviction was later expunged. 2 women sought civil restraint orders against the man in 2010 and 2019, according to Hennepin County court records. The earlier case was dismissed after a judge determined the evidence did not prove domestic abuse had occurred. In the later one, the protection order was granted. A protection order does not indicate a criminal conviction. Mr. Huerta Chuma's record also includes about a dozen traffic violations dating back to 2008. Mr. Huerta Chuma could not be reached for comment, and Mr. Berger, the public defender, said his office had not been in contact with him in years. When it did represent him, the man had said he was a U.S. citizen, Mr. Berger said. Administration officials have said their deportation campaign targets violent criminals. In Minnesota, the Department of Homeland Security launched a website listing scores of immigrants it said had been taken into custody during the crackdown. But when agents have conducted operations in major cities, including Los Angeles, Chicago, and Washington, D.C., most of the people arrested had no criminal record. In Minnesota, more than 100 refugees with no criminal record have been arrested, according to lawyers, family members, and faith leaders. Paul Schnell, the commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Corrections, said that several of the people DHS said it apprehended were actually handed over by state prison officials after completing their sentences. The state launched its own website, Combating DHS Misinformation. Okay, moving on. In a related article, America at a boiling point. Death threats, protests, and a town hall attack. An attack at a town hall in Minneapolis amid a surge in threats against lawmakers was the latest sign of the fraying of the nation's political fabric. The battle for Minneapolis and the killings of two American citizens by federal agents have freshly exposed the dangerous degree to which the nation's social fabric is frayed. The latest smudging of an already thin line between politics and violence in America. Representative Ilhan Omar, Democrat of Minnesota, became the latest target of violence directed at lawmakers on Tuesday evening, when a man charged her at a town hall and used a syringe to spray her with a liquid that smelled like vinegar before he was tackled by security. That same night, the United States Capitol Police released a disturbing report showing a surge in threat cases against lawmakers, their families, and staff members. They spiked to a staggering 14,938 last year, up from 9,474 in 2024. Earlier in the day, President Trump had traveled to neighboring Iowa, talking up efforts to de escalate a little bit on Fox News. But he targeted Ms. Omar just hours before she was attacked and stoked the darkest fears about immigrants, warning a crowd of supporters they would blow up our shopping centers, blow up our farms, and kill people. Hardened, vicious, horrible criminals, Mr. Trump said, vilifying those who have been arrested. There is a new normalcy to political violence in America, a numbing rhyme to the repeated denunciations of after whatever happens to be the latest incident. The assassination of Charlie Kirk, the firebombing of Governor Josh Shapiro's home in Pennsylvania, the attack on former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, the shooting of Representative Steve Scalise at a congressional baseball practice. Representative Jared Golden of Maine, a Democrat, announced he was retiring from Congress last year, in part because of raising threats to his family. He is 43 and a former Marine. After the incident at Ms. Omar's town hall, Mr. Trump, who survived two assassination attempts in 2024, did not offer empathy. Instead, he questioned whether it had been staged, even before he said he had seen video of it. She probably had herself sprayed. Knowing her, he told ABC News. Minneapolis has become the most recent flashpoint in a darkening political struggle that increasingly blended the rhetoric and reality of violence. The city was not just home to the killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy this month by federal officers taking part in Mr. Trump's deportation operation. It is where George Floyd, a black man, was killed by a white police officer in 2020, a death that sparked widespread protests and a racial reckoning, and then a backlash. And it was a nearby suburb that Melissa Hortman, a Democratic state legislator, was assassinated by a gunman last year with her husband Mark in their home. On Tuesday night, Ms. Omar did not retreat as she was confronted. She moved forward towards the assailant, raising her arm before security tackled him. I've survived war, Ms. Omar told CNN shortly after the attack, and I'm definitely going to survive intimidation. The two parties are both casting the looming midterm elections in existential terms, polarizing even further as the elections approach. There's no reward for restraint, lamented Peter Meijer, a former Republican congressman from Michigan who was defeated in a 2022 primary after voting to impeach Mr. Trump in his first weeks in Congress after the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol. If anything, there is a penalty for restraint because you're not rising to the moment. He described the country on this acceleration treadmill towards the extremes. Republicans in the hard right House Freedom Caucus endorsed a call for the president to make use of the Insurrection Act, a 200-year-old law allowing deployment of armed forces to suppress civil disorder. At the same time, a majority of House Democrats are moving to try to impeach Mr. Trump's Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, over the killings in Minneapolis. The left wants total war, Representative Andy Ogles, a Tennessee Republican, said in a social media post calling for the use of the Insurrection Act. Republicans cannot afford to ignore them. In Iowa on Tuesday, Mr. Trump was met with protesters and hecklers, lunatics he called them. One of his warm-up acts, Representative Mariannette Miller Meeks, a Republican who represents a swing district in the state, spoke disdainfully of the protests outside the venue. I want to give the one-finger salute to our welcoming committee, she said from the stage. Later in the rally, Mr. Trump stirred up the crowd by dramatizing the sounds of blowing boats up in the water. Boom, 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 he said, as his administration has done in the Caribbean. The strikes have killed people who the administration has accused of drug smuggling. The Trump administration has argued the attacks are lawful killings, not murders, because Mr. Trump has declared America to be in an armed conflict with drug cartels. International law experts have expressed deep skepticism. The rift came as he was in the middle of mocking Somalia, the nation where Ms. Omar was born. He called it not even a country and claimed it was only known for its pirates. They're good at one thing, pirates, but they don't do that anymore. You know why? Because they get the same treatment from us as drug dealers, he said. Elsewhere in the state on Tuesday, a long-shot Republican candidate for governor cast Democrats as a force for evil in a primary debate. That evil is trying to creep into the state of Iowa and flip us from red to blue, said Adam Steen, the Republican candidate. In Ohio, a Democratic candidate for Attorney General and former state legislator described why he said he wanted to kill Mr. Trump. I want to tell you what I mean when I say that I'm going to kill Donald Trump. The candidate, Elliot Forhan, said in the video, going on to say he would obtain a conviction rendered by a jury of his peers and seek capital punishment. Of course, in a fight between good and evil, there are precious few limits to the tactics the two sides are willing to adopt in order to win. And online, outrage merchants and algorithms alike push us towards the most extreme material. I don't need guardrails, Mr. Trump told Fox News on Tuesday. I don't want guardrails. Guardrails would hurt us. Top Trump officials have accused Democrats of inciting violence and protesters of being rioters, with Stephen Miller, the influential White House Deputy Chief of Staff, initially described Mr. Preddy as a domestic terrorist, domestic terrorist, and without any evidence suggested he was an assassin who had tried to murder federal agents. Videos of the incident showed that Mr. Preddy was holding only a phone in his hand when he was subdued and shot by federal agents. Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland, a Democrat and former constitutional law professor, said Mr. Trump's deportation operation in Minnesota had ravaged the Bill of Rights. The Trump administration has been bulldozing the American social contract, Mr. Raskin said. It has been a searing and vivid sequence of events in Minnesota. But he said that he believed that the killings of the protesters in Minneapolis would turn the tide toward nonviolent de escalation because the administration would be chastened by shifting public opinion. I think the names Renee Good and Alex Preddy will resound in history like the names Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, he said, comparing them to the civil rights activists murdered in the 60s by the Ku Klux Klan. Donald Trump understands that the country has turned against him in a dramatic way because American citizens are being murdered in cold blood by federal agents. One Trump ally, Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, offered a paradoxical view of the president. Trump is man of peace, Mr. Graham said on Fox News on Tuesday night, but he's an eye for an eye guy. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, next article. U.S. trade deficit bounces back as tariffs cause volatility. The monthly trade deficit and imports rebounded in November after shrinking significantly in prior months, new data show. The U.S. trade deficit in goods and services rebounded to $56.8 billion in November, rising 95% from the previous month as President Trump's tariffs reordered trade, according to data from the Commerce Department released on Thursday. Exports fell 3.6% in the month to $292.1 billion. Imports rose 5% in November to $348.9 billion. The combination pushed up the monthly trade deficit, a gap between what the United States imports and what it exports. The data reflected some of the intense volatility that has resulted from the president's trade policy, which has imposed steep taxes on imports. The trade deficit had fallen in prior months, seemingly accomplishing a major goal for Mr. Trump, who views that metric as a sign of economic weakness. The October trade deficit was the lowest monthly figure recorded since June of 2009. But much of that drop was the result of temporary fluctuations in trade in certain products, like gold and pharmaceuticals. Economists have cautioned against a single minded focus on the trade deficit, saying that it can move for a wide variety of reasons, and that last year was particularly volatile when it comes to trade. In the earlier months of Mr. Trump's presidency, companies rushed to bring goods into the country to avoid tariffs, causing imports and the trade deficit to spike. After Mr. Trump announced sweeping global tariffs in April, shipments of imports fell back. Other types of products, like pharmaceuticals and semiconductors, have also seen import surges and declines as the president announced tariffs throughout the year. Last year, through November, the overall trade deficit was still up 4.1% from the previous year. Exports for that period were 6.3% higher than the previous year, while imports were 5.8% higher. The question for economists now is where trade goes from here, and if the president's policies continue to lower imports in the long term. Tariffs could undergo more changes in the coming weeks. The Supreme Court is set to rule soon on the legality of many of the tariffs that Mr. Trump issued using 1970s emergency law, though the Trump administration has said that any levies that are struck down will be quickly replaced using other legal workarounds. The administration has used the emergency law to impose tariffs on nearly all countries and added more levies to products and sectors it deems important to national security, including steel, copper, and upholstered furniture. As of January, the U.S. effective trade rate had climbed to nearly 17%, the highest level since 1935. Okay, next article. What we learned after tracking every lawsuit challenging Trump's policies. President Trump's agenda faced more than 600 lawsuits over the past year. In many cases, district court judges found his policies to be unlawful. The New York Times has been tracking every lawsuit challenging Mr. Trump's policies since he returned to office in January 2025. More than 600 cases and counting. The plaintiffs span the wide range of people affected by Mr. Trump's agenda. Immigrants have challenged their removal from the country. States have asked the courts to unfreeze billions of dollars in congressionally appropriated funds. Schools and universities have pushed back against attempts to set new parameters around speech and research on their campuses. The Times has sued as well over restrictions that the Defense Department has imposed on reporters covering the military. The volume and stakes of the litigation have put an unusually bright spotlight on the often unheralded work of district court judges. Normally, the 677 active status judges toil at the bottom rung of the federal judiciary. Today, they are on the front lines of a clash between two branches of government. They have faced harsh criticism from the White House and rising threats to their safety, and have complained about the Supreme Court's penchant for overruling their rulings on its emergency docket. The Times tracker for the many lawsuits against the Trump agenda can be found here. There's a link to a further article. Looking back over the administration's year in court, here's what we found. Trump often lost in the district courts. On the whole, the district courts tended to push back on Mr. Trump. On final merits rulings from district court judges, the plaintiffs who sued the administration won 48 times and lost only 5 times. An earlier Times analysis also found that district court judges tend to rule against the administration, counting preliminary rulings as well. That analysis found that the judges ruled in favor of Mr. Trump's agenda only 25% of the time in 2025. The administration's record appears somewhat better. However, if you look more broadly at the number of times Mr. Trump's policies have been halted, out of 509 active cases, the administration's policies have been halted 149 times, about 30% of the time. In the remaining 70% of active cases, Mr. Trump's policies remain in effect despite court challenges. Many of those wins by the administration came after it appealed cases to the circuit courts and the Supreme Court. Trump won more often on appeal. Appeals court judges treated Mr. Trump more favorably than their district court counterparts, ruling in his favor 51% of the time in 2025. Much of that support at the appellate level came from judges whom Mr. Trump appointed during his first term. In 2025, they voted in his favor 92% of the time. Mr. Trump's comparative success on appeal is most likely driven in part by the selections of cases that reach those courts. Not every ruling is appealed, and the government has a greater incentive to appeal rulings when it believes the chances of winning a reversal are strong. Other factors driving Mr. Trump's appellate record that have been cited by experts include changes to the judicial confirmation process that made it easier for Mr. Trump to appoint judges in his first term who share his views, the rise of maximalist theories of executive power among the conservative legal community, and the unique characteristics of judges appointed by Mr. Trump during his first term. The Supreme Court usually sided with Trump, but that could change. In 24 cases in 2025, the Supreme Court started to contemplate the Trump agenda, mostly considering whether to issue temporary orders, allowing pieces of it to take effect even as they were challenged in court. It ruled in Mr. Trump's favor 21 times. However, the vast majority of those rulings were on the court's emergency docket. That means that while they carry some weight as precedents for the lower courts, they are not final decisions about the underlying legality of the contested policies. There are some early indications that the Supreme Court may take a different approach in 2026. The court's final ruling of 2025 blocked Mr. Trump's deployment of National Guard troops to Illinois and had implications for other states. This year, the nation's highest court is starting the year to hear a series of what are called merit cases related to Mr. Trump's second term policies. These are cases that have already been fully heard by the lower courts. The parties have then appealed to the Supreme Court, filing extensive written briefs and appearing before the justices for oral arguments. The court took a skeptical tone in two cases it heard recently related to Mr. Trump's agenda. One involved Mr. Trump's attempt to reshape the economic order by unilaterally imposing tariffs, and the other was about his attempt to fire a member of the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors. Rulings on both matters are expected in the coming weeks and months, along with a third case in which the court appeared warmer to Mr. Trump's views, testing his ability to fire independent regulators. The court has also said it will hear arguments in a fourth Trump-related case this year to decide whether an executive order Mr. Trump issued revoking birthright citizenship is constitutional. The lawsuits will continue. The Times Tracker is following 634 lawsuits against the administration. Of those, 509 are still active. New cases are filed mostly every day. During the first weeks of the administration, almost all of the significant action took place within the district courts, as Mr. Trump signed a raft of executive orders, and state attorneys general and other litigants rushed to courthouses around the country in an attempt to block them. District court judges will continue to play an important role in deciding the legality of the administration's agenda. But today, a greater share of cases have percolated upward to the appellate level. Dozens have also been consolidated or combined with similar cases to decide together. Appeals courts have begun to issue final rulings that are binding precedent in the region of the country where they sit, and the Supreme Court has said that even its emergency rulings are intended to guide the actions of the lower court judges in similar cases. So, compared with the start of Mr. Trump's second term, appellate courts and the Supreme Court now play a larger role in deciding the legality of administration policies. Moving forward, the role of the circuit courts and the Supreme Court is in weighing Mr. Trump's agenda is likely to increase further. Okay, next article. Another top Kennedy Center official resigns. Kevin Couch, who was announced as Senior Vice President of Artistic Programming less than 2 weeks ago, is the latest to leave since President Trump took control of the center last year. The top official overseeing artistic programming at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts has stepped down less than 2 weeks after his hiring was announced, the latest senior official to resign. Kevin Couch, who was Senior Vice President of Artistic Programming, said he left the role on Wednesday. He declined to provide a reason for his resignation. Mr. Couch, formerly the Director of Programming for ATG Entertainment, a British theater company, is the latest in a string of resignations and show cancellations since President Trump purged the center's board and made himself chairman last year. More artists have withdrawn since the board voted to rename the center to include Mr. Trump late last year. The center announced Mr. Couch's appointment on January 16th. In the news release, Richard Grenell, a Trump loyalist and the center's president, said, "We are proud to welcome Kevin Couch to the Trump Kennedy Center as we expand our common sense programming. Kevin brings a clear-eyed approach to curating a roster of compelling shows that invite and inspire all audiences." Mr. Couch said in the news release that he was honored to join the Kennedy Center at such a pivotal moment for the performing arts. The center did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Its website, list of executive leadership and artistic partners, did not include Mr. Couch as of Wednesday evening. With the resignation, it is the second time in 4 months that the center will be without its top official who oversees programming of over 2,000 performances across 9 stages every year. Mr. Couch's predecessor, Jeffrey Finn, who was also the vice president and executive producer of theater, stepped down in September after nearly a decade programming the center's touring Broadway shows and locally produced musicals. This latest resignation comes amid deepening turmoil at the center, several weeks after the Washington National Opera said it would move its performance out of the venue, and one day after the renowned composer Philip Glass said he did not want his symphony honoring Abraham Lincoln to perform by the National Symphony Orchestra at the center this June. Okay, moving on. Next article, more of a worldview article. At the world's busiest port, China's unbalanced economy comes into view. The shipping traffic and factories never stop in China's port city of Ningbo, but the local housing market has crashed and nearby restaurants sit empty. To understand how China's economy is now experiencing both the best and the worst of times, consider the port city of Ningbo, a 2-hour drive south of Shanghai. Ningbo's vast port handles 150,000 ships a year and is the world's largest by cargo tonnage. A seemingly endless armada of tankers and bulk carriers arrives to discharge imported oil and grain, while other vessels pick up tens of thousands of containers daily. Departing ships are packed with manufactured goods headed for the global markets. Enormous car carriers, essentially floating parking lots with a dozen floors, transport China's rapidly increasing car exports. Teeming with factories that make everything from fabric and apparel to household appliances and electric vehicles, Ningbo offers a full display of China's industrial prowess. Its ports and manufacturing facilities are the engine that helped power China's record trade surplus last year. But a very different portrait of China's economy can be seen several miles up the Yangtze River, where the old Bund Historic District stands at the site of Ningbo's 19th century port. There, housing prices have collapsed, as in many other parts of China. Construction has stalled, and the municipal government has cut spending. Declining home values have eaten into the net worth of the city's middle class, leading to reduced consumer spending. The restored old Bund neighborhood, home to art galleries, restaurants, and bars, was largely deserted on 2 evenings last month. Crooners in the bars sang to empty tables. The sightseers avoided venturing into any of the establishments. The main reason is that people just don't have money, said Sarah Jin, manager of a toilet store at a construction materials market in Ningbo's outskirts. At the market, the sales dropped off drop off has been bleak. The toilet store's sales were down by a third. The plumbing supplies outlet had tumbled 70%, and the door seller's business had plunged 80%. Government data indicates that Ningbo's troubles are worsening rapidly. Investments in new apartments, office buildings, factories, and other fixed assets, once the cornerstone of China's economy, unexpectedly fell 1.4% in 2024. Then last year, the bottom dropped out. According to data from the Ningbo Municipal Bureau of Statistics, fixed asset investment plummeted 21.4% last year. In the West, national governments accelerated spending during economic downturns to cushion the shock. But in China, local governments do most of the spending, and they have long relied on land sales and other real estate related activities for revenue. As the property sector fell into a tailspin, Ningbo officials cut expenditures. The city's spending dropped 5.6% last year, according to the Municipal Statistics Agency. In the boom years, before the pandemic, municipal spending had risen 11 to 13% annually. Tang Fufang, Ningbo's mayor, acknowledged the city's difficulties in a speech last week. Ningbo lacks follow through in major industrial projects, and there is continued pressure on the stable growth of foreign trade and foreign investment, he said. Consumption potential has yet to be fully unleashed. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, next article from the opinion section. This is an article by Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota. She says, "My state showed courage. Will Republicans?" We are in the midst of an all-out emergency. Thousands of masked federal agents have invaded my home state, Minnesota, terrorizing immigrants, communities, and citizens alike. As anyone who has turned on the nightly news in recent days can see, they're acting more like an occupying army than any kind of law enforcement organization. Agents of the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees both immigration and customs enforcement and customs and border protection, gunned down two of my constituents, Renee Good and Alex Preddy. And so far, the Trump administration officials have engaged in what amounts to a cover-up. They seized the Department of Justice on Mr. Good's partner, slandered Mr. Preddy, and issued subpoenas to local and state officials who are desperately trying to keep the peace. Gregory Bovino, the senior Border Patrol official, is out, and President Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, is in. The agents who shot at Mr. Preddy have been put on leave, but my state is still under siege. In my career as a chief of staff lieutenant governor, and senator, I have worked with fellow Minnesotans to get through emergencies ranging from the collapse of the I 35 West Bridge to the murder of George Floyd. Although we've never seen a situation like the current crisis, I know from experience that you deal with an emergency in three phases: response, recovery, and prevention. Congress has an obligation to act, but up to now, nearly all of my Republican colleagues seem cowed by Mr. Trump. So, what should Democrats do? First, we must use the power of the purse. I agree with my colleagues who want ICE agents to wear body cameras and undergo better training. We are well beyond that now. Democrats should make clear that this invasion, Operation Metro Surge, must end immediately. There must be independent and transparent investigations into the killings of Ms. Good and Mr. Preddy, led by Minnesota's law enforcement agencies. The era of unacceptable secret police occupying our streets has to end. And the architects of this project, including Mr. Bovino, the Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, and the White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, must resign. Next, Democrats must help our country recover from this crisis. We should make clear that when we regain control of Congress, that we will hold everyone responsible for this mess accountable, and that we will claw back every dollar of the ICE slush fund included in Mr. Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill Act. We need to rip ICE down to the studs and start over. The Department of Homeland Security is barely more than 2 decades old. In the wake of this catastrophe, there is no reason we can't come up with a way of enforcing our laws that doesn't trample on our values and our Constitution. Democrats should produce this plan now so we can present it to the American people come election time. The midterms are just months away. Finally, we have to help congressional Republicans find their courage. Even when this crisis is over, and even if Democrats succeed in winning back the House, the Senate, or both, we will still be living under a president with authoritarian instincts who appears dead set on destroying our republic. Clearly, Minnesota is the proving ground for what Mr. Trump and his advisors want to do across America: assaulting peaceful demonstrators, racially profiling people on the street, and extorting a state to get access to its voter rolls cannot be tolerated. I am inspired by the patriotic Minnesotans who've demonstrated their resolve, braving freezing weather to stand up for their neighbors and our founding principles. And I'm aware that ending Mr. Trump's war on our democracy requires more power than Democrats currently have. Many of my Republican colleagues do, in fact, understand what's at stake. They know that what's happening in Minnesota isn't making America safer. When I talk with them about my ideas for reining in ICE and the Border Patrol, they don't look at me like I'm crazy. They are productive conversations to be had here. I am encouraged to hear my Republican colleague, Senator Rand Paul, say what I believe most Americans think about Mr. Preddy's tragic death. I don't think it's honest to say he brandished a weapon. I don't think it's honest to say he assaulted officers. I was encouraged to hear two of my Republican colleagues, Senators Lisa Murkowski and Thom Tillis, say that Ms. Noem should go. A handful of Republicans could join with the 47 members of the Senate Democratic caucus and, without abandoning their party or their principles, prevent Mr. Trump from engineering the next crisis. Quite a few have expressed their concern to me privately. Now they face a decision. To them, I say, Minnesotans have stood up for common decency. Despite the killings of Ms. Good and Mr. Preddy, they keep coming out into the frigid streets, phones in hand, to document the brutality of masked agents wreaking havoc in their neighborhoods. Think about the courage they've shown, and then look within to see if you can find some courage of your own. Okay, moving on. This will probably be the last article for today. Rubio says Venezuela will submit monthly budget to the White House. Democrats sharply question the plan, including the role of Qatar in managing an account funded by the sale of Venezuelan oil. Venezuela's interim government has agreed to submit a monthly budget to the Trump administration, which will release money from an account funded by the country's oil sales and initially managed by Qatar, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said on Wednesday. But the plan drew sharp questions from skeptical Democrats, and Mr. Rubio conceded that it was novel and hastily designed. The role of Qatar, a Middle Eastern country thousands of miles from Venezuela, whose ruler has won President Trump's favor, drew particular criticism from Democrats who questioned its legality and transparency. Mr. Rubio detailed the plan during an appearance before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. It was Mr. Rubio's first public testimony to Congress since American forces captured Venezuela's leader, Nicolas Maduro, on January 3rd, and an opportunity to clarify U.S. policy toward the country. Many questions are sure to persist, however. Mr. Rubio assured senators, for instance, that the Trump administration had established a very respectful and productive line of communication with the government of Delcy Rodriguez, a close ally of Mr. Maduro, who assumed power after his removal. As a result, he said, the Trump administration does not intend or expect to use military force against Venezuela at any time. Yet, Mr. Rubio took a more threatening tone in a written opening statement that he submitted to the committee, but did not deliver orally, making brief extemporaneous remarks instead. The written statement warned that the U.S. was prepared to use force to ensure maximum cooperation from Ms. Rodriguez's government if other methods fail. That cooperation is largely focused on Venezuela's lucrative oil industry. Mr. Trump has previously said that the United States will control Venezuela oil and run the country, but Mr. Rubio provided more details. The United States will help Venezuela's government fund basic public services by dispersing proceeds from the sale of Venezuelan oil that is subject to U.S. sanctions, Mr. Rubio said. He said that the approach was necessary because of the fiscal crunch in Venezuela and that it was a short-term mechanism, not meant to be permanent. They needed money in the immediacy to fund the police officers, the sanitation workers, the daily operations of government, Mr. Rubio added. They have pledged to use a substantial amount of those funds to purchase medicine and equipment directly from the United States. In an argument that he acknowledged was unusual, Mr. Rubio said the funds would initially be held in an offshore account controlled by Qatar before eventually transferal to a U.S. Treasury account. I understand it's novel, but it's the best we could come up with in the short term, Mr. Rubio said. He said a third-party account was necessary because of U.S. financial sanctions on Venezuela and because U.S. creditors to whom the country owes money, mainly from its seizure of American energy company assets roughly 20 years ago, could otherwise make legal claims on the funds that would complicate their disbursement. The Venezuelan government did not immediately respond to a request for comment about the plan. Some Democrats have doubts. I think this is novel. I think it's funky. I think it may not even be permissible, Senator Brian Schatz, Democrat of Hawaii, told Mr. Rubio. Mr. Schatz questioned whether the Trump administration had the legal authority to create and manage such an account. He also complained that the administration had not released the text of what Mr. Rubio said was a written agreement with Ms. Rodriguez's government. Mr. Rubio said the Treasury Department could provide the agreement. Representative Lloyd Doggett, Democrat of Texas, said in a statement that Mr. Rubio's testimony raised more questions than answers and demanded to know why, instead of Qatar, the administration had not chosen a country with much stronger banking laws and a history of robust management of oil reserves. There are certainly no safeguards to ensure the Rodriguez family does not use the revenue to pay off Maduro's allies, including paramilitary groups and drug cartels, to maintain control of the country, Mr. Doggett said. And by shielding the money from creditors through the use of a Qatar account, he added, the Trump administration is unlawfully refusing to honor debts owed to U.S. institutions. Mr. Rubio also paired questions about whether and when the United States would insist on a political transition that removed Mr. Maduro cronies from their continued hold on power. I can't give you a timeline of how long it takes, he said. It can't take forever. I get it. We all want something immediately, but this is not a frozen dinner you put in a microwave and in 2.5 minutes it comes out ready to eat. Mr. Rubio's undelivered written remarks suggested that Ms. Rodriguez had bought herself some time. It is our belief that her own self interest aligns with advancing our key objectives, he wrote. She has committed to opening Venezuela's energy sector to American companies, providing preferential access to production, and using revenues to purchase American goods. While many Republicans praised Mr. Rubio and Mr. Trump for what they called decisive action against Mr. Maduro, their policy did not sit well with many Democrats. You are taking their oil at gunpoint, Senator Christopher Murphy of Connecticut said. You're deciding how and for what purpose that money is going to be used in a country of 30 million people, he added. I think a lot of us believe that this is destined for failure. Okay, you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the January 29th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Your reader today has been Mark Ryer. Have a great day and stay warm.